Yeah, I have this PowerPoint slide which is supposed
Which
to be
was
updated, but I
which
haven't.
version?
This is Informatica Power Center 10 version.
10 version. Okay, okay.
But for this demo, I would explain you about Power Center architecture and how does it work, and we can take it forward.
Okay.
As you are from the ETL background, I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't take much time for you to understand. So this architecture, it's more or less the same. If it is, even if it is a Power Center 9 or 10, you have a domain, which is an administrative unit, a logical ETL environment, where you manage a business and you have a node that you control a physical machine. A node is a physical machine on which your services are installed. You connect server through your client tools. You have client tools like repository manager, designer, workflow manager, and monitor. And through native drivers, through the TCP/IP protocol, you connect your client to your server. And again, you have the sources, which are ODBC sources, and you have this domain configuration. So the administration would cover the entire setup, from a basic standpoint of installation, configuration, and how do you work on migrations, how do you work on deployments, and how do you manage the upgrades and repositories and everything.
Okay.
So
Just tell
there are
me,
different components. Yeah.
just tell me about this domain and nodes Profit. I didn't. What is the domain? Yes, domain and nodes.
So domain is an administrative unit. For example, I have a domain. Let's say I have. Let me bring up a PowerPoint. I mean this one, a Paint, so that I can explain you in a physical.
Okay.
I mean, I'll just show that. Okay. So domain is nothing but it's a component. It's a main administrative unit. Where you actually manage your services. Like this entire. For example, I have a domain called domain dev environment. This is where I get multiple. I can set up nodes. I can set up a node. I can have multiple services inside this, and I can actually have let's say this is node 1, this is node 2. Node is nothing but a logical representation of a machine. I have one node, I have 2 nodes or 3 nodes in my organization, and they
Okay.
all
Those
belong
two.
to one specific domain.
Okay. So they should be
One,
inside the box, or they should be outside, the ones you drew the nodes?
yeah, they're all part of
The domain.
once a domain. Actually, a domain is a main administrative unit which would control your Informatica services. So when you install service, when you install Power Center, you actually create a domain. You create a
Okay.
domain for yourself, and if you keep adding nodes, for example, I keep adding node, one more node and other node here to the domain. I keep adding multiple nodes here, so that they all belong to this domain. And
Domain.
from this node, I can actually create, just a down arrow. Sorry. So this is a down arrow. For example, this down arrow, right? Under
Right.
this node, I can have multiple repositories. I can have multiple repositories. Like I can have repository A, repository B, repository for ASCII integration services, a repository for Unicode integration services, and I can have a repository. Repository is where it would store your metadata.
Material.
So that's
Okay.
typically on a database. Again, repository content would be residing on your database, be it Oracle or SQL Server. It can be anything. You understood? So repository is running on Oracle instance. For example, I have this Oracle, this is my system. I have the repository tables. I don't have Power Center installed on this laptop, on my specific laptop, but because I'm working on cloud, I don't need, on-premise. This is everything is on cloud, but I don't want to mix up things here. So let's stick on to Power Center here. So for every node, you have application services. You have different application services like Power Center repository. Power Center Integration Service, you have data quality, you have Web Services Hub, you have different other services. So now let me go to Power Center Repository. What is repository? A repository is a relational database managed by the repository service, because whatever you do on the client tool, the client tool, whatever you do, that gets stored in the form of metadata, the specific column. For example, I have a table. Let's say I have a table called, uh, folder, repository folder. Let's say I don't have a table here, but I'm just giving you an example, like repository folder. Now, if I create a table, if I create a project called training, a project called training, that project name is stored in a form of a column here under the table called folder, repository folder. Okay. So we'll get to know more about it, when we start a training and do the installations and configurations, and then, we can think about, we can discuss in detail, and you will understand in detail about the contents, repository contents.
Okay.
But when I talk about metadata, it's nothing but mappings, transformations. They're all metadata.
Normally the Informatica, right?
Yeah.
What is the recommendation of which database we need to have for the repository? What they recommend?
They
Best one.
recommend Oracle or SQL Server, but majority Oracle.
Yeah, right.
Oracle is being used widely as a repository content,
Database.
which stores the
Okay.
metadata, because
Okay.
it works very close hand in hand, and they have all the bug fixes done, and Oracle is more being used widely across organizations. And yeah,
Sorry.
and
Okay.
repository connections. How does the connections would do work? You have a Power Center client, and you do, with the help of a TCP/IP protocol, you connect to a node, and you have a service manager which authenticates your ID, and you connect to a repository service. And similarly, for node B, you have this, and you connect to a repository.
So Node has a service manager, and what is that?
Yeah,
Application
node as a
service.
service manager. Correct. Yeah.
Application service repository service. Okay. So that will
Yeah.
give that will validate and give you the, I mean, whether he
Yeah.
is the
So
right,
valid user,
right, valid
right
user.
user validates it, and it allows a connection to
Mhm.
the repository, so that you connect to the repository and you can perform your ETL operations. And the moment you complete something, you load the data is loaded into a repository database.
Okay.
So speaking about Power Center Administration Console, what does console do? It's a
Yeah.
web-based user interface to administer your Power Center domain. Now, I'm not, it's not exactly a similar way, but I have a cloud instance. I'll just explain you how does work in cloud for administrator. See, this is administrator. Okay.
Okay.
The administrator, you have an organization. So when I install my administration service, I tag an org here, right? I tag an org with a license, which is my free trial account. Let's say free trial account. And I also have a SAML setup here, which will help me to enable single sign-on.
Mhm. What is
And also
SAML setup means? SAML setup means?
SAML is the single sign-on, security assertion markup language, which is a
Okay.
single sign-on license that can be enabled on your Active Directories, which can integrate with your company Active Directory, so that you assign a role and you map a role, and the moment you log in, it would redirect to your Active Directory, and it would bring back the authentication, and it would allow you to log in.
Hmm.
Yeah. Similarly, you have users. Like in Power Center, we have a domain, right? You can also create users here. You can multiple users. You can click on users, and you can assign privileges to the users with the groups that you define. You also have groups, and you also have user roles. So they are predefined, system-defined user roles. Like you have admin, you have a data integration, data previewer, designer, deployer, monitor, operator. Depending on the role that you have in the organization, your user role is mapped. If I'm an admin, obviously I'll be admin role. If I'm a deployer, if I'm an operator, I don't need development access. I just provide operator or monitor access to a testing team so that they just have
What?
to
Oh,
run the job.
operator and monitor, are they two different? Both are same, right?
Yeah, no. Monitor is to monitor your jobs. It doesn't require,
Right.
for operator, you need a role to execute a job. To
Mm-hmm.
execute your job, you need an operator role. Okay,
Okay.
that's a system defined roles. And
Mm-hmm.
even you can create your own customized role. If you have a need, you can click on add role and you can create customized roles. So I'm just relating it to Power Center because I don't have the Power Center instance.
Okay.
Sorry for that inconvenience. In fact, I mean, this has come up like this newly to me. I couldn't prepare that fast. So I'm just relating it to cloud. Do not get confused. This is Power Center, which is
Okay.
on-premise, native thing. Okay. So
Yeah.
you can create, manage folders. We can create integration services, repository services. You can do upgrades. You can do, you can actually work on checking the log events, ensuring, managing users, monitoring user activity, managing services. So admin job, I can say in a nutshell, it's like a seasonal thing, sometimes it is peaceful. Sometimes
Yeah.
it is, overwhelming, you end up in working like 10 hours or 12 hours a day. Depends, depends on the releases, depends on the application releases, depends on, different versions that the Informatica vendor would release, right?
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the organization needs, you do a lot of things, but there's a lot of change that has happened recent times where automation has come, in picture.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, we'll speak more about it, but like I'm just giving you an overview. How do you create a folder? See, this is an old one. Please don't refer to this. This is an old admin console, the picture that you see here. Uh, and you have a something, it looks something similar only, but you have where you can create a folder. This is Power Center, where you can create a
Mm-hmm.
folder, you can create repository services, you can create manage users, manage your logs, upgrade your repositories and servers. And
Okay.
repository management, repository management, how do you manage users? Left side you see the grid, the grid that can be created, nodes can be assigned to a grid, and you can actually create contents, delete contents, backup contents, upgrade. These are all admin activities. You
Okay.
can do a lot of things. Perform all repository maintenance work.
Okay.
Okay. So any questions on this repository management?
No, no. About this integration service, how many we can have this integration
Yeah, we
services?
can have multiple integration services tied up to your repository, because see, your integration service is kind of a postman. It does a postman job. It's actually taking your sources and targets, and it is loading to your respective databases. It is a inbuilt service. Which is
Is
tied
it
up to your
inside
repository.
it's inside the domain, right? Or inside the
Yeah,
domain?
everything is inside the
Everything is
domain
inside
only.
the
Like
domain.
if you have a repository here, you need to have an integration service. You can have multiple integration service tied up to one repository, but you cannot have vice versa. You cannot have multiple repositories tied to one integration service. It's like that's how in the relationship is defined.
So
You can have
every in
ASCII.
every integration service will have one repository, right? It has to have one repository. Uh,
Yeah. So every repository will have multiple integration service, and every
Multiple.
integration will be tied up to one repository.
Okay.
Yeah. So coming back to this repository management and repository manager interface, this is how the client component would work. Look like this repository manager, where you perform all the folder management. Like you actually create connections, and you do a lot of things here. You create folders, everything. If you want to add a repository, you can do this. You can just connect to a repository, give your configuration, repository domain name, the host name, and the port number that you create while installing it. and you configure, and users and groups, you can create users and groups here. And this is how you actually map the users and groups. Now everything is redesigned in cloud, in this way. Like the cloud, this is all internet. It's all happening on internet. I don't have a client on my machine, on my laptop. This is all URL. It's an API driven thing, right?
Okay.
So in Power Center, it's all on premise. Whatever that you do, that gets stored in the database. Whatever change that you do. For example, if you
Right.
go to folder permissions and you change the permission, you change from administrator to someone, and you just click on OK. It gets reflected immediately in your repository database as so-and-so repository folder name is changed. So-and-so person. That's it. That's how it is. For Power Center, which is on premise. Okay, and you can also get something like object locking, where you can unlock things, and you can do a lot of things. So just a brief about this, because there are a lot to discuss about this administration, but I want to just give you an overview about the course content, what would be covered in the course content. Like
Okay.
Informatica server and client installation is what we're going to cover. We're going to cover, so we're going to cover installation of domain and repository database on Oracle, installation and configuration of Power Center, how to use and navigate the console, identifying the threads, DTM processing, managing licenses, creating repositories, Power Center integration service, installing client and connecting with domain, creating a sample workflow, create, delete, backup of contents, starting and stopping the services, folder copy, creating folders, whatever we discussed so far, right? I'll cover everything in this, and
Okay.
purging older versions in case of version enabled repositories. We also have something called version enablement,
So
versioning in Power Center.
like suppose you're going from 10.4 to 10.5, so you keep the
Mhm.
10.4 version. That's why you save it as a version, right? Does it? Or
No. It
how
doesn't
do you?
work on the same repository. See, version control is like you have a check-in, check-out, right? Version control.
Right.
You have a check-in, check-out. Topics about check-in, check-out. Version control is if you want to do some change in the code, right? You check out and you check in later, after you're done with the code. It's not about
Right.
version 10.4 and 10.5. 10.4 and 10.5 are the Power Center versions. That's on a client level or at a server level, where you cannot have two different versions running at the same time.
Mm.
I mean, you can
Right.
have
Yeah.
it. You
You
can
can
have it in
upgrade it, right?
separate
Yeah.
separate instances. On the same instance, same Linux instance or same Windows instance, you
Mm.
cannot have two different versions of Power Center running. You can have it in the separate installation, separate directory. You can have it, but
Okay.
that's going to lead confusion, because everything, whatever you do, that gets stored in metadata. I told you, right? It gets
Yeah.
stored in your database. So we'll discuss about all this: metadata queries, deploying a group, object migrations, and performance tuning. What needs to be done. So these would be the topics that would be covered as part of the administration course content.
Okay. So will it be the same for what would be what's the difference? You're saying that you already have cloud, right? The same thing will be there for cloud. That is,
No,
all
for
these
cloud,
topics.
see, for cloud, we don't manage the metadata. The only difference is for cloud, see, in cloud, you have a runtime environments, which is managed by yourself, which is a local secure agent, and Informatica cloud hosted agent. But we don't manage the metadata of the cloud. It's all managed by Informatica vendor, Informatica product. They manage the metadata. And the secure agent is installed on your local machine to manage your own data, your own organizational data, to ensure your data is secured and sitting behind your firewall, right? That's how we configure a local secure agent. And this is not exactly a similar like in Power Center. In Power Center, you can query the metadata, you can find out the jobs and everything. But in administrator, in cloud, it's different. You have different services here. For example, if I click on data integration, right? Data integration is similar to my client components that you see here. I've just shown you some client components, right? Like repository manager. Now repository manager is where you have a client component here. See, repository manager, you perform all this drag and drop features. But in cloud, it works in a different way. It is everything is like, you have the same components embedded here, but they look different in shapes. If I just click on create a mapping, if I click on create a mapping, I get shapes here. So these are called shapes. It's called a mapping canvas. But this is a different thing. The metadata is not managed by us. It's all managed by Informatica.
So is it means managed by Informatica means the time it takes to process and all, is it not delayed? The database wise getting the data and all, the
No,
to and
it
fro.
doesn't get delayed. It doesn't get delayed. The moment you do something on premise, it gets stored in your database within the same time. It doesn't get delayed. But the only convenience, see, from a convenience point of view, right? From a convenience point of view, this is evolving. I mean, this is evolving in the sense like, from a cost point of view, right? See, when you think about on-premise, you need to have servers, you need to have you need to maintain a lot of, you need to do installations, and you need to do some bug
Yeah.
fixes. Everything has to be done on-premise. There should be a client-server connectivity, as I told you here, right? You need a client and a server connectivity for on-premise thing. But whereas in cloud, this is where you have an additional thing, where you can connect multiple other connectors, like AWS or Snowflake, or you have a lot of connectors here. But in Power Center, you have a limitation. You can't connect everything here. For example, if I click on cloud new connection, right, I get options here to create multiple connectors, including AWS, cloud integration hub or Snowflake, right? But in Power Center, you have limited options. You don't have those options that you see in cloud, because this is all API driven. It's all API. Okay, so that's about it. And this is the course content I would cover in Power Center, and we'll cover everything because I cannot show you the client directly. And during the training itself, we can install the client, we can install the server, so that you'll understand the functionality of an admin. The basic roles and responsibilities of administrator from beginning to end. I'll be covering everything. Whatever you're supposed to learn, we'll do that.
Okay.
Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Bye.
Sure. Yeah.